Serious, Redditors who are the products of incest, parents, great-grand etc. Have any genetic disorders or recessive traits affected you? I have family from Kentucky and everyone in that holler as well as 3 nearby are related. They marry in, not many outsiders have been added. My family on my father's side has a history of epilepsy, which I also have. I'm not sure of anything else. They have a family feud that's been going on for 100 years, so one surname doesn't talk to the other. They probably don't even know of any health issues. I've read on a similar thread that you'll only come across such things if you have diseases in the family anyway. I wonder if it is true. I'm using a throwaway because a couple of friends know my username. My family history on my mother's side has always been something of a blip in our otherwise normal family. My grandmother was a product of incest, her mother and father also being siblings. It came out during my great-grandmother's pregnancy that this baby was the result of incest. I don't exactly know how. I'll clarify with my mother when it's not nearly 4 in the morning. Obviously, my family was not okay with that in the slightest, and so my grandmother was raised in a very toxic environment and the effect this had on her was enormous. My grandmother ended up having 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. She was physically and emotionally abusive to all of them. She beat them, forced them to stand facing the wall for the entire night with no sleep if she was in a bad mood, forced them to sit in baths of freezing cold water. It was the little things really. How she tore up my mother's certificates she had won for her cross-country running. In short, she was a rather mean and unpleasant mother. Now, take this all with a pinch of salt as I'm not exactly an expert on incest etc. But my mother's side of the family has a suspicious amount of health conditions that may or may not be a result of the incest. We're not sure. These include things such as schizophrenia, depression, psoriasis, multiple sclerosis, Raynaud's, forgive my spelling, polycystic ovaries, protein C deficiency, alopecia etc. Those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head, and I really don't know if they are because of the incest or if we're just very unlucky. Sorry for poor formatting, I'm on a mobile. Anyway, TLDR, incest fricks with your genes. The mental illness may have been a factor in the siblings making a baby rather than the other way around. My background culture is from the hinterlands of Sindh province, in Pakistan. Here, from uncounted generations to this day, the best marriage is considered between first cousins. There are entire villages of people with the same last names. The first thing relatives do when their child is at a marriageable age is to winnow through his or her first cousins. Failing that, they comb through the ranks for second cousins and so on. Anybody who marries from out his caste, as we call the last name, is considered a weirdo by everyone he meets. I've been living in Canada for over a decade, and as far as I can see, the proportion of inheritable disease appears to be the same. So I believe that apart from the ick factor, there might not be as much genetic effects as people here seem to imply. The only exception to this rule was in a small village close to my own. They also followed the usual Sindhi trend of looking for marriages within their immediate family, and then gradually widening their search. In this village, there is a strange effect that may or may not be due to faulty genetics. Basically what happens, every few years, an angel boy is born to some couple. The child appears healthy, invariably a male baby. He's born with very fair, almost albino skin and attractive cherubic features. The problem is that these boys invariably die within a month or 2 despite any treatment, any medicine the desperate parents can afford. And some of them are very rich, round-the-clock care at expensive hospitals, special diets, insulated rooms. Nothing works. The maximum lifespan was about 4 months, as I recall. That's why they are called angel children. This applies to me. The only way I was affected is the fact that I have ocular albinism. It's a disease that causes visual impairment and nystagmus. It's pretty rare, and at times, it's been hard to deal with. But overall, even with vision of 20/200, I find ways to lead a perfectly normal life. I actually had no idea that incest was what caused it until last summer. I had a tough time dealing with it for a few months, but I realized things could be so much worse. My grandparents are first cousins, and their grandparents and so on and so on. It was a commonly accepted practice in Puerto Rico until very recently. My mother suffered from numerous recessive and partially dominant blood disorders that made her very likely to have blood clots. She died of a clotting type stroke in her mid-40s. She was homozygous for all of these disorders, so I am heterozygous, meaning I am a carrier for the recessive ones and only express the partially dominant ones mildly. It still sucks pretty hard to be in your 20s and have to have a medical team. I plan to have children, but do worry about passing on bad genes. All in all, I'd say that widely accepted incest is bad news bears. We never told her parents that her health problems were caused by their being cousins, and the cousin marrying stopped in my family after my grandparents' generation. Child of incest here. My dad was my mom's uncle. They met at a family reunion for extra points lol. Haven't really noticed much on my end. No major issues like physical deformities or anything. Mental issues, bipolarism, depression, etc. tend to run in my family, so I deal with some of that. Depression mostly, and occasional hallucinations. Not sure if that's been made worse by the fact that my parents were related or not. Does my mom marrying her uncle count? If so then no. I'm allergic to penicillin but everyone in my family is. My parents are first cousins. Not a big deal where I'm originally from. South India. Though no one in my generation, I'm almost 42, considered marrying their first cousins, or had it arranged for them. It's still a common enough practice in the region. This means that I only had 3 great-grandfathers, and I blame the one that both my parents have in common for my balding pate. Nothing much else to complain about. My daughter was diagnosed at age 18 with mosaic Turner's syndrome. She has no physical features like webbed hands or feet, but after the doctor told us that, I recalled that my grandfather's sister had webbed feet and hands. She never had children either, so did a little genealogy search. Did not have to go back far on that side of my family to find a great, many times back, grandfather who widowed. Then wait, what, wasn't she his sister? You can't marry your sister. Yep. Comma, she has no physical features. The way that sentence started really confused me. I know 2 cousins that were married. Their daughter has a skin condition where she can't go out in the sun. That was when she was a kid though. It kinda went away I think, but she had it for a lot of her life. Her face would always be red and peeling. Funny story. I'm from a town called Scarborough and there is a smaller town called Whitby about 20 miles away. Scarboroughians refer to Whitby people as cousin lovers. This is a common thing in England. If there's a smaller town to yours nearby there always seems to be this thing that they're all inbred. Anyway, one day at a previous job we were on a sort of team building day. I was talking to one of the trustees when he mentioned Whitby and I made a quip about cousin loving. He then, perfectly politely turned to me and said, "Oh yes, my parents were first cousins. I nearly died." Then for no reason he added, which meant I always knew I couldn't marry one of my cousins. Which was a shame because one of them was quite nice. You mentioned these 2 towns in England, but there is a town called Scarborough east of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and a smaller town called Whitby about 20 miles to the knee. I wonder if Whitby on is also full of inbred peoples. Maybe this belongs over on our milda. Interesting. Also mildly interesting is that both Scarborough and Whitby pairs are along water lines, Lake Ontario and North Sea. Both sides of family had incest. On my dad's side they founded a village going back to the time when Canada was being colonized, and for many a generation the diversity in the village wasn't great at all, so getting married to your first or second cousin was normal. On my mom's side it's pretty much the same, but it's stated only about 5 generations back. Health problems, mainly Alzheimer's on both sides and mental health issues on mom's side. Everyone of my mom's side had died for the past few generations of Alzheimer's. It's just great knowing of what you'll die of. Was normal. On my mom's side it's pretty much the same, but it's stated only about 5 generations back. Health problems, mainly Alzheimer's on both sides and mental health issues on mom's side. Everyone of my mom's side had. Break the chain, marry someone as further away related as possible, someone out of state, out of country, who knows. My middle school music teacher is married to his sister. He changed his name so they could marry. It was a much brought up point by all the evil little adolescent children I was surrounded by. Even though we lived in rural Alabama, they have one child and his name is Kevin. He has Down syndrome and is one of the weirdest kids I've ever met. My fondest memory of him is the time he walked into the bathroom when I was a freshman, dropped his pants, spread his butt cheeks and crap in the urinal next to me. Good times, good times. Interesting you pose the question, but many native tribes and Amish deal with this problem because of how enclosed their small community is. My dad's side of the family are old southern country folk who married whoever was within a stone's throw of the community church, which often ended up being cousins. I'd say this was happening about 3 generations ago. My dad has really terrible allergies that prevent him from being able to taste or smell, something his own father suffered from too. We also have a lot of homosexuality in our family, although not to say that's related. I'm gay myself, as well as heart disease and heart attacks. Not really the answer you were looking for, but incest runs pretty rampant, though not recently, through my family tree. Will report back in 30 years with the state of my own health. This is how my husband wound up with a sister who was also his cousin when his mom stepped out on my father-in-law with a pair of brothers. My husband's ex is also his cousin by marriage, being his aunt's husband's brother's daughter. Family functions in a small town are weird, tense, and you definitely need a flowchart. My ex's parents are first cousins. My ex has a deformed ear. It is flat where it should have the ridges and stuff. I didn't notice until she had her hair up one day. My boyfriend has that and he's not the product of incest. It's just normal human variation, I think. My maternal grandmother's parents were first cousins. I don't know if it affected our gene pool, but they had a son with schizophrenia and my grandmother had agoraphobia. Same here except paternal instead of maternal. My dad and most of his brothers and sisters were very healthy, intelligent, and lived long lives. Oddly, my mom's side is where all the weird diseases and mental illness runs rampant. I grew up in Israel next to 2 Iranian Jews that were first cousins. They have 4 kids. As far as I remember, all of them were normal. Then one day the couple came over to speak to my parents. I overheard them speaking to my parents, which are doctors, about some mood swings that one of their sons was experiencing. Today that I'm a doctor, I know that it was Wilson and I didn't understand it back then. I know that their daughter is suffering some liver issue as well right now and is awaiting liver transplant. They are all really nice people. I feel sorry for them. I don't know about Jewish Iranians, but I do know in general in Iran first cousin marriage was considered pretty okay, especially in the generation before me. Nowadays we think it's really icky. I should use a throwaway, but frick it, my parents aren't related, but there's incest here and there on both sides of the family. It's kinda weird, but we live with it. I can't really tell you if there's anything specific any of us deal with because of it. We all have a screwy medical history, but I don't know what's incest and what is just the genetic lottery. On my father's side, I had an aunt cousin that was born of incest. My biological grandfather raped his daughters and he managed to impregnate one. Apparently the resulting child was born with a lot of genetic abnormalities. She was premature. Her body was tiny. Her head was twice the size of a regular head. She had a lot of facial deformities, and she was severely developmentally delayed. She probably had a whole bunch of other stuff wrong with her, but this was 1970s Mexico and the family was poor, so no real doctors to care for her. She died shortly after her first birthday. This was well before my time, so I only know the stories about her. I'll ask my mom later if there's any details I'm missing. My father isn't in the picture, but for some reason my grandmother told my mom everything before she died. I think she even showed her pictures. That's pretty bummer. There goes my smile. See? I have no 2 cases. Father, daughter and brother, sister. The brother sister product were healthy but were unattractive to an extreme degree. The father daughter child had spina bifida, bone marrow issues and mental issues. Nope, my sis and I are fine. She's 6 years older. I did have another sister, however that was 1 year older than my older sister. She died when she was about 6 months old due to some lung issues. Not sure on details. You didn't specify the type of incest. My grandparents were cousins in northern Canada. We learned this when I was going to get my metis status, native mixed with settler. We couldn't figure out why our family tree had so many holes, turns out yet they're second cousins. I have Asperger's syndrome, ADD, and OCD, also anxiety diagnosis. My sister has paranoid schizophrenia and is bipolar. She has severe mental issues. Not sure if this is attributed to my family's relations. To be honest, your grandparents being second cousins isn't a likely cause of the problems. We're all products of incest if you go back far enough. Usually it doesn't take more than 4 or 5 generations before you find a section of your family tree that joins together when it should be branching off. Cousin fricking was rampant before the 1900s. I hate to adhere to the stereotype, but half my family is from the wilds of West Virginia. When I got heavily into genealogy 5 or 6 years ago, one of the first things I found was that 2 of my great-great-grandparents were first cousins. Yeehaw. No genetic disorders that I know of. Most of my family is from West Virginia. Every time I visit and meet more relatives, I'm not quite sure how incest wasn't possible for them. It seems like everyone is related somehow. My grandma and grandpa on father's side were technically cousins. They were like distant cousins. They were from a small rural town in Italy, which is now a winter resort town. Anywho, the only genetic problem I'm aware of on their side is high cholesterol. My aunt married her first cousin and had 4 children. The oldest 3 seem normal, but the 4th is severely mentally disabled and has autism. He doesn't speak and will never be able to care for himself. Don't know if it's coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence. A lot of the posts here seem to be describing issues with autism and mental problems. I think Wikipedia might have some more reliable info on it. Because of World War II, there was a case of unintentional incest in the village where my mom lived growing up. They had a couple and their 2 children were blind, deaf and retarded. It turned out the parents were brother and sister. Both their parents died during the war and they were separated through placement in different orphanages. They grew up, met each other and got married, and the result of the incest became apparent right away. My great-great-grandmother married her uncle and had 1 daughter. She was a little slow but not quite mentally retarded, and she in turn gave birth to 3 children, one of whom was mentally retarded. After the one retarded son, my great-uncle, the rest of our family is relatively normal with no mental disease or otherwise. Might be too late, but my parents are first cousins. Apart from childhood asthma, I never had any significant health problems. I was in my high school soccer team. I do have hay fever though. My younger brother has been more unlucky with his health, although doctors say it stems from his premature birth. 3 weeks. He had pneumonia as a child and is still asthmatic. If anyone has any questions regarding my health or my family background, I'm more than happy to answer them. My half-sister's parents are father and daughter. She is bipolar, an alcoholic, a chronic and pathological liar, and has to be one of the most selfish people ever. She only found out about my mother's rape by my sister's grandfather 2 years ago at age 31. I don't think her junk is genetically based, but I think her situation growing up unconsciously fricked her up. Great-grandparents were first cousins, had 4 kids. Grandmother died in mid to late 50s due to lung defects. 2 of grandmother's brothers are mentally unstable and insane. One is pretty normal, but something about it is kind of off. Can't put your finger on it. My grandmother came out to be the only sane one, but she got the short end of the physical genetics. I'm sure she had a slew of other issues, but I am from Egypt and poor and they didn't have access to the best healthcare. Maternal grandparents are second cousins, had 6 kids. A lot of them have bipolar and severe depression, including my mother. We also have a high amount of people with diagnosed celiac disease on my mom's side of the family. Not sure if that was a result of the incest or not. Otherwise we're all healthy minus the bipolar and depression that seems to be common in my cousins on that side as well. I come from a small town where much more people have been moving out in that past years than moving in, so you could probably guess that the gene pool has been shrinking a bit. Anyhow, you can kinda see some prevailing traits all through the town, specifically in our schools. A lot of the town's kids have been showing similar traits, phonetic being sinking chins, poor teeth, and mental being prevalent forms of autism, Asperger's, etc. The younger in the generations you go, the more you can see how common some of the less desired traits have begun to show. I think that we're going to earn the hills have eyes status if we don't get some new gene pools ASAP. Back in the 1960s, my parents' neighbors were 4 adult children of a brother and sister. 3 of them were varying states of mentally disabled and 1 was mostly normal. She, normal 1, was able to function in the world and take care of them, pay the bills, etc. They lived out in the country on what had been their parents' and 1 set of grandparents' farm. My dad would tell the story of working in the field one day when he shut the tractor off for some reason. He heard this loud crying coming from the edge of the field, so when he checked it out, it was one of the daughters. Apparently they kind of wandered the country at times, and in this case she'd gotten lost and didn't know where she was. Dad was able to get her to go with him and he took her home. I know he always felt sorry for them because they were kind of like big children with no parents. Sad. Worked with a guy whose mother was raped by her own father. He is pretty messed up physically and mentally. This thread is ridiculously biased since people with severe problems aren't likely to be one here and respond. My grandparents were first cousins, but I went on to be an attorney, and my sister isn't a doctor. I have a degree in molecular genetics, and understand why she and I don't have problems by it, but there are too many oh my god inbred people out there that I never mention it. My uncle and aunt are first cousins. They have 3 kids and they all turned out fine. I've heard that it's only through multiple generations of inbreeding that significant health issues occur. I know I am a little late, but basically I am a direct descendant of a family that owned one of the biggest plantations in an area of North Carolina before the Civil War, and my family would only marry people from the other biggest plantation owners and vice versa. This went on for generations until it was basically one big family and all children for the next generations were from incest. Until the Civil War, when my family fled up north losing their wealth and the incest stopped. Don't think I have any repercussions though. I actually rolled moderately well gene pool wise. My grandparents are first cousins. They also each have a brother and sister who married each other first cousins too. I know it's confusing. No genetic issues, but they only had 2 kids. They believed that the 3rd kid might be the fricked up one. This all happened in the mountains of Italy before they came to America in the 50s. I'm not sure if my health issues have anything to do with it, but my parents are close cousins. I had trouble being born, and currently suffer from health issues. Not strictly incest, not in England where I'm from, but my maternal grandparents were first cousins and it turns out had the genes for familial hypercholesterolemia, inherited high cholesterol. This was not discovered until both their children, my mother and uncle, died of heart disease in their 40s and 30s respectively. As a result, both myself and my brother have been on statins for all of our adult lives. My grandparents were cousins, but my entire family lineage kinda lose like a Twizzler tree, so I can say that we have no physical abnormalities. Some in my family have a lower IQ and potential anger issues. I have to admit I have anger issues but got the brains. My maternal grandmother and grandfather are first degree cousins. My paternal ones are also probably related because they lived in a godforsaken close-knit village where shittons of people have the same surname. My mother's side is rampant with MS, schizophrenia, depression and a bunch of other mental illnesses. I think I'm in the clear, but my sister is a diagnosed sociopath. I'm not really sure about my father's side in terms of genetic diseases, but they all have thick as frick ankles and that I unfortunately inherited. My great-great-grandparents were cousins, which wasn't quite taboo at the time. My family blames their history of mental illness on them. My grandmother's family all lived on empty Etna in Sicily, like real hill people. My grandfather, whose family lived in the neighboring city of Catania, would always joke with her about a hillbilly, I don't remember the word in Italian, side of the family and how they stayed to themselves for everything. Even marrying, and she'd always get really upset. Well, eventually we all go to Sicily, uncles, aunts and cousins, to see some family for New Year's, and when it was time to see grandma's relatives on the mountain, my grandpa took me aside. I was the youngest, and said, listen, there's going to be some different looking people in there. A lot of them were born like that because they're all related. Just stay calm, enter the house and immediately see a giant man, 6 foot something, who is deaf, blind and yelling some kind of moaning sound. Everyone was uncomfortable the whole time except my grandmother's relatives, bearing blind guy, who were ecstatic their family wanted to come meet them. It was a very weird day and we spent the rest of the trip with my granddad's family. I'm fine though. TLDR. Meet grandma's family after being warned they are hillbillies. Turns out they're from the hills have eyes. Turns out they're from the hillbillies have eyes. My grandparents on my father's side are distant cousins. They are members of a Native American tribe in NC that basically is made up of 5 families. My grandfather was descended from 2 of them, my grandmother from the other 2, and everyone in the tribe was related in some way to the 5th family, be it by marriage or blood, typically both. My father married a white woman from another state, so obviously there is some genetic diversity with my brother and I. The running joke in our family is regarding the large heads that run in my dad's family. I was unaffected though my twin brother has a pretty big head in comparison to the rest of him. The genetic diversity continues with the next generation as I married a white man and recently had a red-headed daughter and my brother has a blonde child with his white girlfriend. Needless to say, it'll be rather funny to see our kids participate in tribal ceremonies given how very not native they look. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.